going to talk about certain concepts. Actually, there is a book which is called Derech Hashem, Path of God. I'm sure a lot of you know about the book. Anyways, you could get it even translated into English. But one of the things that this book talks about is why do we find that people, good people, suffer? And we find a lot of people that seem to be like not such nice people, wicked people. Not only they don't suffer, but they prosper. They live a long life, successful life. Even when they die in an old age, not from pain, not from sickness. They have a wonderful life. Obviously, this question only applies, and but I don't know if it's why bad things happen to good people, or the question should be, does bad thing happen to good people? In our eyes, might be bad, but really, are they really bad or not? We're going to discuss that. And this question only makes sense for somebody that believes in God. If you don't believe in God, what's the question? If somebody suddenly dies from a heart attack at a young age, he had a bad heart. His heart wasn't healthy. That's the way it is. But obviously, if it really bothers us, well, this guy was such a good person, he didn't deserve it, is because we believe that there is a God, and therefore there has to be justice. And then again, common sense says a good person should have a good life, and someone who's evil shouldn't have an easy life. So we're going to discuss actually and talk why do we find that bad things happen to good people or the opposite. Really, there is no one answer to it. There's more than one answer. And one of the requests that I have is please let's not start judging people. If something bad happens to him, it must be because of what we study in the book. We don't know. There's a possibility that this is one of the reasons, but we don't really know. Only God knows the exact reasons why these things happen. So you see what happens is that Ramchal wrote this, by the way, in section 2, chapter 2. He writes that when God created the world, the purpose was not for the time of now, that there's wars and people are getting killed. He didn't create it because he enjoys wars. When God created the world was for the situation in the world to come. That means after the resurrection. Mashiach comes and people will get resurrected. And at that time, God is going to give the ultimate reward to every good human being. Jew or non-Jew, doesn't matter. We don't believe that the world to come is only for the Jews. Could be for anybody who's a Christian, a good Muslim, a good person, doesn't matter. Somebody who really believes in God and is a good person, he will have the resurrection. Because at that time, everybody is going to be attached and study about God. No evil, no competition, nobody, because of his own power, is going to actually kill others to get what he wants or hurt others what he wants. If that's a purpose, so why did God create this world? Take us straight to the world to come. Clear? So the answer is obviously, yeah, the purpose is for the world to come, but we have to come in this world in order to get to the world to come. And he gives two reasons why. Number one, if God would give us the reward right away, we would feel like freeloaders. And it's not a good feeling. Imagine you go to somebody's house, you're a guest. For a day or two, you're okay. But if you're going to be a guest there for a whole week, you feel so embarrassed that you feel obligated to buy a gift. Even let's say if you're invited to somebody's house Friday night. I'm saying, I've seen your parents, they buy flowers, they buy a bottle of wine, they take challah and wine. Why do you do that? Because I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to be, sorry, I'm not using such a good language. I don't want to be like a freeloader that just goes and eats, but doesn't give anything. So if God would have created the times of Mashiach and the world to come, and we would straight go and enjoy it, that means I didn't earn it. I'm getting it for free. That would be very embarrassing. According to the words of Kabbalah, they call that bread of shame. Bread is sustenance. It's a type of a spiritual sustenance that we have, but it's really shameful because I didn't earn it. So God brought us here in this world that there's a lot of trouble, there's a lot of, evil inclination, a lot of temptations. But when a person decides to be a good person, right, and not to go after evil, so then he earns his world to come. That's reason number one why we have to come here. Reason number two, which goes around the same way, but is much deeper. You see, for a person to be able to be attached to God, that's, the biggest reward that we could have. You have to be similar to God. You have to, You have to emulate God. What is the biggest differences between a human being and God? God is a giver. God doesn't receive anything. He doesn't need anything to receive. A human being, a creation, is only a receiver. And I'm saying mostly. You're not givers. So as long as I'm just a receiver, right, and I'm not a giver, then I'm not similar to God. Let's go a step further. God is the most complete being. There's really no word that could describe God. But if there is any word that can describe God, is that He's the most perfect being. He's not lacking anything. Any perfection is within God by Himself. Nobody gave that perfection to God. So for a person to be able to be connected to God in the world to come, he has to emulate God, meaning that he has to make himself perfect. How's that possible? I have nothing of my own. So the only way that's possible that God creates us with deficiencies. We are lacking many things. And I work on myself to make myself complete. You see, I come to this world, I could be selfish or be a giver. So if I become an unselfish person, so then I created within myself with my own efforts the character trait of being unselfish. Somebody could be arrogant because he's smarter than others, or because he's richer than others, or could be humble, realizing that whatever gift he has is given by God. So when I decide to acquire the concept of humility, I made myself perfect in that aspect of humility. You get what I'm saying? So that's why God brought us here, that I could choose any way, good or bad. When I choose to go on the good way, I made myself perfect. So I'm similar to God, because God is perfect on His own. Nobody gave the perfection to God. So in the world to come, I could be attached to God. Is that clear? So then in the world to come, everybody has to have an effort to make himself the best person, the most perfect person, to have a share in the world to come. But then God doesn't want to have a world to come with only individuals. It's going to be very boring. No, I'm just kidding. God wants to have a whole community of perfect people. Is that clear? So now what happens is, because that's why God gave us an evil inclination. He gave us temptations. Otherwise, we would just be perfect because we have no other choice. But there is a big problem. And let's see what the problem is. Some people will choose to do only good. Some people might choose to do only bad. Correct? So the solution is very simple. People that don't only do good, they deserve to be in the world to come. People that only do bad, they don't deserve to be in the world to come. But the serious problem that we got is people that are mixed. And most of us have good and evil. You get that? There's no such thing. Either you become like Moshe Rabbeinu or you become like Hitler. Doesn't work that way. There are a lot of people that are good, they're nice people, but we do wrong stuff too. So I'm a mixture of good and bad. So here God has a problem. What is He supposed to do? The evil that is within us, right? As long as we have that, we can be connected to God in the world to come. One of the simple examples they bring. Imagine you invited to a banquet made by the king. Could you go with a shirt that has 5 black stains on them? They're not going to let you go, and you have to have clean shirts. You have to have clean clothing. You can't go with dirty clothing. Correct? So then, for me to be connected to God in the world to come after resurrection, I have to be very, very clean. But most of us, because we have a good inclination and we also have an evil inclination, we're mixed up. You have a lot of good deeds, you have some bad deeds. That's the challenge that, so to speak, God has. What is supposed to do with this guy, which is majority of us? As the Mishnah says, I mean, it's a pasuk actually. It says, "Ein tzadik ba'aretz asher yaseh tov velo yechta." There is no righteous person on earth that he does good and he doesn't sin. We have a few wrong things. So because of this, so God has a choice. Let's go through the choices. He could say, I'm going to judge you with your majority. If your majority is good, you have a share in the world to come. If a majority is bad, I don't care about the minimum good that you did, you're not going to have a share in the world to come. Do you think that's a good judgment? Just look at the majority, forget about the minority of our actions? So the Ramchal says, the author of this book, no, because God's judgment has to be perfect. For every good deed, we have to get reward. And for every bad deed, there has to be a consequence. So God can't say, you know what, otherwise His judgment is not perfect. He can't say, you know what, okay, if you're 90% good, let's forget about the evil that you did. You're going to have a share in the world to come. That wouldn't be a perfect judgment. Number two, what's God going to say? If somebody's 90% bad, you're not going to have a share in the world to come. I don't care about the 10% good that you did. It's not fair. For the good that he did, he has to get a reward. Is that clear, people? We actually find, a story like that God, I'm going to get back to it, sorry. Let's go straight. So what God has to do, he made a choice, a perfect choice, that is going to divide the reward in 2 different times. and the punishment in two different times. Part of it in this world and part of it in the world to come. What's going to be for the world to come? The majority of our actions. Let's say if somebody is majorly good, he's 90% good, 70% good, he will have a share in the world to come. What about the 30% or 10% bad that he did? These were illegal pleasures, so to speak. So that righteous person, he has to suffer in this world. Is that clear? The suffering in this world will cleanse him. So you see, he's a righteous man. Why is he suffering? True, he's righteous, but very, very possible that he has a few wrong things that he did. Is that clear, people? Am I getting your attention? I hope I am. So then, because of those 10%, he gets suffering here. But that's actually not only that makes God's judgment perfect, but it's actually good for the person. Why is it good for the person? Because the little stains of impurity which is on him gets cleansed in this world. That explains, the suffering of a righteous person. Now, somebody who's evil on the other side, because he's majorly evil, I'm not talking about 51%. Some guy's 99, very, 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 very bad. But he has a few good deeds. God has to reward him for his good deeds. So he's going to get the reward of his good deeds in this world. And then in the world to come, he won't have any share whatsoever. So this is the first reason that the Ramchal brings, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, to explain why we find good people suffering, and why do we find that people that are really evil, they have a good life? Because a righteous person is suffering for the little bad things that he did here. So that makes God's judgment perfect, and he will completely deserve the world to come. And then a bad person that is enjoying life here is because of the few good deeds that he did, that is getting the reward here, but he won't have a share in the world to come. Actually, this is the only answer which is brought down in the Talmud. And actually in the Torah too, according to Rashi. The Talmud says when Moses saw God, by Mount Sinai or something, so he asked God, why do righteous people suffer? Why do wicked people prosper? That was a serious question. So God tells him, you know why the righteous person suffers? Because he's not completely righteous. He's mostly righteous. You know why the evil person prospers? Because he's not 100% evil, he has some good. So this is the only answer the Talmud gives. Actually, we have it in the Torah also. If you guys look at Parshat Naso, we're talking why good people suffer and why bad people prosper sometimes. At least they seem to be bad. Why do they prosper? So actually, we have it in Parshat Va'etchanan. Let me just read it for you inside in English and the way Rashi explains it. I'm sorry, just give me a minute. It says in the Torah, this is all the way at the end of the parsha, that's in the verse number 10. It says about God, and he pays his enemies in his lifetime. These are enemies of God, right? That means they're sinners. So he pays them in his lifetime of the sinner, to make him perish. He shall not delay for his enemy. In his lifetime, he shall repay him. What in the world does that mean? He's going to pay his enemies in their lifetime? So Rashi explains, we're talking about an evil person that has some good. So God pays him for his good in this world. So he won't have a share in the world to come. Is that clear? We're going to change the subject a little bit. We're going to not so much parsha for the next few weeks, but we're going to go actually through this concept. It's from the book of Derech Hashem, explaining why we have good people suffering. Now what happens is, let's say if somebody is not like 95% good and only 5% bad, that the suffering in this world, will cleanse him. Let's say you're talking about a person that is only 60% good. It's 40% not good. And the suffering in the world doesn't cleanse him. Otherwise, he's going to have too much of a miserable life. So what would God do? He can't get cleansed here. So he's going to tell him, forget about him to have a share in the world to come. Let me just go back. When we talk about having a share in the world to come, maybe I didn't explain myself very well. Everybody wants to be perfect, right? What's a perfect American life? You have your own business, right? I'm thinking secular Americans. It says something prosperity, peace. I don't know what it's called. Sean Hannity always talks about it. Liberty, life, spot. I don't know what it is. I have no idea. Somebody knows it? Okay, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. You have your own business, you make your own family, wonderful wife and kids, you have your own house. That's a perfect life. But that's only in the secular world. According to Judaism, perfect life is when you become perfect, meaning you get attached to God. Because God is the most perfect. So if you have a relationship with God, you're perfect too. Everything else which you think is perfection, except being connected to God, is only perfect compared to a lower level. But compared to a higher level, it's deficient. You're lacking. For example, let's say an angel might have a more perfect life than a human being. The angel doesn't get sick, doesn't go through traumas, none of those things. But compared to a higher angel, his life is not perfect. If you have a homeless guy compared to a person that at least could pay his rent, yeah, the guy that could pay rent, his life is more perfect. But when you compare him to another person that actually has money that it could buy a house, he's also missing. Now, somebody has a house, but his business is struggling. So, compared to a person that has a good business, he's also not perfect. The only true perfection if somebody is connected to the most perfect. And that's only when you're connected to God. And that happens in the world to come. So that's why we're saying that for a person that has a few sins, he suffers over here a little bit to be connected to God in the world to come, which is the most perfect life. Why don't we feel it? Why do I enjoy a movie more than sitting and learning Torah? Why is the steak more enjoyable than sitting and studying Torah? Really? We could go to Tel Aviv, eat, and then talk till 12 o'clock if it's open. We don't get tired. But after 40 minutes of studying, we get tired. Why is it like that? Because the body is blind to enjoy spiritual enjoyment. The Maimonides says, imagine a guy that never had a vision. Can you explain to him the difference of green and blue? He never saw anything. Or a guy that never had hearing. Can you explain to him notes of music? Of course, I never heard anything. The body is totally blind and insensitive to spirituality. So steak makes me excited. Sitting and talking to my friend that I didn't see for 6 months is very exciting. Has to do with the physical body. But spirituality makes me bored. But if I would have really known the beauty of spirituality, I would have never gotten bored. So now going back to our discussion that we had, what happens if somebody is only 60% good? Is 40% bad. So he's majorly good. He deserves the world to come to be connected to God. But the suffering in this world is not enough to cleanse him. So here the Ramchal comes with a chidush, he comes with a new idea. That's why we have afterlife, what's the word for it? Purification, which they scare us. They tell us this is Gehenna, or in English, hell, purgatory that we go to. It's not really a punishment. It's a cleansing process. It's a surgery process spiritually. So let's say if somebody doesn't get cleansed in this world, he has a chance, at least in the world to come. Afterlife, to get completely clean. Is that clear, people? So this is the first reason explained why we find good people suffer or why bad people prosper. Is because of this reason that the Ramchal brings. We actually have a very interesting story that actually proves it, that God will pay everybody's reward. Everybody knows who destroyed the first temple? One of the kings of Assyria, Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar. I think that who was the guy? Saddam Hussein. He had like something called